I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but the 1960s were a turbulent time in America. You know, Vietnam, women's lib, dogs and cats living together. It was a crazy time. But the emergence of Satanism in the 60s isn't something that's come up before on Toasting the Classics. Ira Levin's novel Rosemary's Baby and the film adaptation by Roman Polanski tapped into a strange new current in American life. While some people were indulging themselves in the typical pleasures of a decadent civilization, others took it a bit farther and dove straight into practicing the black arts. Rosemary's Baby tells the story of a young woman who falls into the hands of a dark cult. Betrayed by her own husband and gaslit into a state of paranoia, Rosemary fights a psychological battle against dangerous mystical powers. This film is a thriller, an art house tour de force, and a symbolic reification of a fraught moment in history. It just might also be responsible for the satanic panic that made its toxic intrusion in American life over the next few decades. There's quite a bit to unpack in this one, so we thought we'd fix up a batch of the Castavet's favorite cocktail, the vodka blush, and discuss the harrowing events at the Dakota. It's time for episode 91 of Toasting the Classics, Rosemary's Baby. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic, and in this case, I've actually seen things online literally calling this a classic, so I think it's bona fide. We take something that people call a classic, we drink something that's inspired by the classic, and then we talk about it and decide whether it's actually going to be a classic. I think this was kind of solely my pick this time, and I just kind of drafted you guys as it came up.
Colin told us.
Yep. Because it was kind of a last minute thing. So what I picked was Rosemary's Baby, the film, the 1968 film. I happened to have read the book about a month ago. It was just on my list of books to read. And then I go through every now and then if I want to watch a movie and I figure something that's put on my list. And this is like, I don't know if this is my wife's favorite movie, but she watches it over and over again. I'm not 100% sure what the reason is. Maybe we could talk about it as we go. Yeah, so I put this on. We watched it together. I was taking notes during the movie. And so I wanted to talk about it. I figured I'm watching a supposedly classic movie. Why not sit down and chat about it? I got some friends with me this week, drafted from the bullpen. I got Chris Gragg. Say hi.
Hello, yes.
And Kevin Doyle. Kevin.
Hello.
So what did you guys think? What do we watch? Anybody want to do a synopsis? How do we want to jump into it?
Well, I mean, do we want to talk about Polanski first? I mean,
we can't avoid talking about Polanski. So, well, just in case, I mean, this is a movie that's what, 50 years old? More than 50 years old? 50?
Over.
Yeah, more than 55 years old already. So this is a pretty old movie, so a lot of people might not be familiar with it. Does anybody want to give a shot at the synopsis? I'm happy to do it, but if somebody wants to stretch their vocal apparatus some. Chris always does a bang-up job of doing the synopsis. Never wanders off track.
I'll try and keep it somewhat brief this time because okay. I think at heart, it's a fairly straightforward movie. It's a movie about a woman who is gaslit by everyone when she moves into a new apartment building in New York. Her husband, her neighbors, her doctor, her original doctor, pretty much everyone with the exception of her close friends and her big family, which for some reason don't make any appearance in the movie, which is kind of weird.
If you read the novel, it's because she's just estranged from her family completely. They live
she's
in
not
like
Catholic anymore or something.
She's not Catholic anymore. They live in Omaha or something, and she has a couple of phone calls with her sister, who she's still in touch with, but otherwise she's just. And this movie, by the way, normally I would say that the novel is not evidence of what's going on in the movie, but this movie is spitting image of the book. I didn't see almost any departures at all.
You know, I've heard that, and I've heard some interesting reasons why, and I've also heard that the movie is really different from the book in some ways because the book has kind of a surprise ending, whereas the movie really foreshadows what's going to happen. And the horror that comes in is really because you know what's happening and she doesn't.
No, I think it's so I would say now I kind of knew what was going on, so maybe that's not the right take on it, but it seemed to be about the same level of what's going on through the book and the film.
Okay.
Like there's clue there. Not just clues, but she's starting to suspect what's going on all along. It seemed obvious to me when I was reading the book. I don't know. Like I said, I did kind of know what was going to happen in the book, so it's kind of hard to judge, but it didn't seem like a big secret to me. Although, you know what? This wasn't as common of a plot back then. This book/movie is where this idea comes from. This idea,
Yep.
And I guess spoiler alert, but it's 55 years old. The idea of Satanists and being involved with children and stuff, this is where this comes from.
Yeah, this is the urtext, not just for that, but I think for a lot of modern horror.
Well, Satanism was kind of a thing at this time too. Like,
Satanism is definitely a thing at this time. Yeah. And it's
Anton
it's
LaVey
not even
published the Satanic Bible the year after this. I mean, there were it started all the
Church of Satan.
Satan.
Church of Satan was founded in 1966, which is 2 years before this movie.
Right.
So this is part of the zeitgeist, big time.
Yeah.
It's not even just its influence on film or books or anything. Ira Levin actually talked about in the foreword that I read to the book, talked about being sorry he'd done this movie to some extent because of things like the Satanic Panic in the early 80s and just like all the harm that ended up doing and getting that out there in the world came from his work in a way. This is just an imaginative book that he wrote. Doesn't have anything to do with reality.
Let's perhaps try and finish up the synopsis real quick.
Right.
Sure.
She is gaslit into being the mother of the Antichrist. And that's how the movie ends. Satan's son is born. She is explicitly the mother and is talked into raising him, ? And the movie ends. But
So you're saying,
I'm leaving out a lot there, but most is...
The high concept is pretty simple, like you said.
Yep.
Pregnant woman, oh no, she's not even pregnant to start the movie, but she's thinking about having a child. She thinks everybody around her has fallen into it, basically like a satanic cult, and then that ends up being the truth. And it's really about the execution, because the movie's psychological. It's slow, it's thematic, it's dealing with feminism and shifting morals in the 1960s. And
I think the twist though was that she thought that her baby was going to be sacrificed, and she didn't really connect that it was going to be born and it was going to be, the Antichrist or whatever until that very last scene. I think that, that last scene where she's, essentially accepts the offer to be the mother. It doesn't really say it, but like that, it's almost open-ended there at the end where she kind of accepts the role and kind of the gaslighting is complete, or at least the brainwashing or the mind breaking is complete. She's totally lost herself.
It's a way of asserting herself though, right? She has no power over the situation otherwise. She's tried everything at her disposal to try to establish power, and the only way she can get it, maybe this is a little more talked about actually in the novel, but basically the only way she sees being able to have any influence over this child in the future is by agreeing to be the mother. So she decides to go ahead and just be the Mary to the Antichrist, which, by the way, I didn't intend this to be appropriate for Christmas, but it turns out it is in a weird sort of twisted way.
Yeah.
And New Year's.
Figure it out, but I guess that
New
Year's, the opposite of Christmas. You're right. I didn't think.
Yeah, no. I think Chris said something about that when he was like, "Oh, that's appropriate for Christmas," and I was like, "Whoops, I didn't mean that. It was just happened to be what movie I was watching." But then, as I was watching the Birth of Satan part, I was like, "Oh, there's kind of a nativity at the end of the movie, so it's kind of weirdly, bizarrely perfect." So,
what would the Church of Satan call that? An anti-nativity or something? I don't know.
It's still a nativity. Nativity just means a birth, so I don't know.
Who were the three wise men?
Satanic nativity?
Oh, the three. Well, the Japanese guy must be one of them.
Right? The Arab guy, probably.
And there's a couple of other. Was there somebody else there? Other foreigners?
I thought there was an Arab guy that came in at one point. They don't actually introduce these people. They just sort of show up.
No, they're just there. I kind of like it when movies do that, sort of just throw things at you, because I think that's one of the reasons why my wife rewatches this movie, is because it rewards rewatching. There's clues.
Oh, very much so.
There's
there were a lot of little subtle things, like when her husband Guy, and that's his actual name, he's just a guy. When her husband leaves the apartment, she goes over to the window and doesn't see him leave, but here's the doorbell ring next door. That's an interesting thing to talk about. When do you think the husband bought into the satanic ritual?
I think he genuinely has no interest in meeting these old people in the first time when they go over the time when, by the way, they have a vodka blush as a drink, which is what we have for the show today. I think I found the same recipe that Kevin did, but Kevin, you can go ahead and tell everybody what's in a vodka blush, because you were the one to.
It's
definitely one of those recipes where you have to get down to the whole bottom of the webpage before the person stops telling you their life history and gets to the. It's only 4 ingredients, but it ends up being like a 600 or 700 word recipe. But
yeah, it's basically mostly vodka with some dash of grenadine,
right?
A couple of drops of fresh lemon juice.
Did you not use lime?
Oh, I'm sorry, lime. You're right.
Okay.
My apologies.
I don't know if it matters, but I did use lime. That's actually why I was a little.
None of these ingredients. All I had was vodka, so mix it with.
Yeah, me too.
Lemon seltzer, and that's what I got.
Oh, I actually had grenadine, fortunately, because I went around to the stores, and in New York, if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you just can't get it because nobody at the grocery store speaks English, not one single person. So you're like, can I get grenadine? And you're like trying to describe what grenadine is in some way, and I'm like, oh my God, like this person's not even gonna know what a pomegranate is if I get the concept across. Apparently, there's a rule in New York: you can't sell mixers at the liquor store.
Oh, weird.
I'm like, why on earth?
Probably because it encourages deviant drinking or some such nonsense.
It might be an economic thing. It might be just to not steal away from.
No, there's no way. That sounds like the equivalent of a Sunday law in New York City, which is why a lot of hotels were originally established.
I thought they were established so that people could sleep somewhere while they're traveling.
No, in New York originally, there was a law passed that said you could not serve alcohol unless you also served food.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Places where you would have I can't remember the name, but there was like a sandwich, and they would put the sandwich on the plate and then put the plate in front of them and serve alcohol, and they would just rotate the same sandwich around the same people for about a week.
Weird. I mean, there's always like a little rack of chips. People always have like a little rack of chips behind the counter at a bar. It's like a $5 pack of party mix.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a holdover from the same law. That'd be really interesting. Actually.
I think so. That was always my take on it. Yeah, exactly. Had either of you guys seen this movie before?
Had not. No.
I thought I had, and I think I was confusing it with some Vincent Price film because this was much better than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be campy. I thought that this, there was a camp element. This was actually very serious, very well structured, very very well done. It wasn't like a campy B horror. This was
actually done by Castle Productions, the same company that did a lot of those famous schlocky horror movies. But when they put it together, they specifically had a clause that said that they could produce but not direct the film. And Roman Polanski adapted the film from the book, wrote the screenplay. Yeah. And the screenplay was about the same length as the novel, actually. At least the original was about 250 pages. And I think the novel might even be a little bit shorter than that. It's not a long novel at all. So that's why it seems really faithfully adapted, if you ask me. And then also, I think he was just a very auteur director. He's from Europe. I guess Kubrick was working in America before this, obviously. But he's in that same vein. Like, he's really taking the project very seriously.
Have you seen other movies he's done at this time?
I've never seen any of the European stuff. Obviously, I've seen Chinatown.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that Chinatown is post-Manson murders.
Yeah.
And this film is pre-Manson murders.
Well, by a year. This happened the year before. By a year. And the similarities, too, between...
There's got to be a connection. Sharon Tate is in this movie. She's not pregnant, but she's already his fiancée.
She gets pregnant. She was killed,
and is murdered by Satanists.
Yeah,
at least to some degree, the Manson family are Satanists, murdered by Satanists within a year of this. Maybe in 1970.
There's a lot of weird stuff about this film. John Lennon was shot and killed in the place where
at the Dakota. That was
the Dakota, which is the
apartment building in the movie is called the Bramford. But the Bramford, in the book, they actually say, oh, maybe you should consider living at the Dakota instead. Because it's the Bramford is a fictional building. The Dakota is a famous building. It's actually, I could walk there after we get done with the podcast. It's right down the Upper West Side. John Lennon was shot, ran into the vestibule of the Dakota after being shot, and I think pretty much died in the entrance to the Dakota, which is the building that the exteriors were done. I don't know. I meant to look it up, but I'm not sure whether the interiors were actually shot at the Dakota. I don't think so.
That's where Cavitt's father died. Like the same spot is essentially where it's weird. They were
where who?
Cavett, Mr. Cavett, the older gentleman. I can't remember his first name.
I thought it was where the original house guest jumped off the building was very close to where John Lennon was shot.
Oh yeah, that would be the same. Yeah, that would be the corner right there, basically. Yeah, it's like right on the corner of it's either 71st or 72nd Street. It's right there where it is on Central Park West, and that's where the Italian girl. They find her in the movie, and that's pretty much where Lennon probably died in the taxi or in the ambulance, but that's where he was shot.
Did you spot William Castle in the movie?
I don't know what William Castle looks like. No, who was he?
You know, when she's in the phone booth and the guy with
the guy that comes up and
cigar
stands
comes
up.
up. That's
Looks
what
like Henry Kissinger standing outside of the phone booth. Yeah.
He got some sort of health issues. Actually, Polanski went into some coma. There was all these. They called the movie Cursed.
Polanski had the whole Manson thing. The music director went into a coma and passed away after.
Oh, okay. So that's kind of like a Howard Carter and King Tut's tomb sort of thing. There's like some bad stuff befalling the people who are on the production. Okay.
Well, you know, they all felt like they released this bad thing into the world, and they were
they did a little bit, right?
Kind of did in a way, I guess. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, if you think about it, like we said, it was out there. Like Satanism was definitely a thing in the culture at the time. I mean, obviously not a dominant thread in the culture at the time. We were talking about this. If we said, everybody said the Antichrist, right? But don't they believe there is no God?
I mean, they were downplaying the Catholic Church and the Pope. I think
God is dead.
Yeah, you could probably write a thesis on that. There's the whole God is dead thing that comes up several times.
Right. It was God is dead, not necessarily that he's doesn't exist. It's just that he's dead, or because you're right. The Time magazine that came up, God is dead. It was a thing at the time.
Which apparently I was misled by Elton John, who said the New York Times said God was dead. Apparently it was Time magazine. It seemed to me like at the end, though, that they said something about, that God was just a superstition. And I'm like, but you believe in Satan? How could you believe why is one of those beliefs more reasonable to you than the other?
You can't have Satan without God, right? I mean,
I don't think so. I mean, I guess you could. How do you get to that point? I don't really understand that, but
right.
I read it more as them making fun of the Pope, which makes total sense for a Satanist to do.
Yeah, that I get. I mean, I get how somebody who was a dyed-in-the-wool Christian might make fun of the idea of the Pope. They call them Protestants. There's a lot of those people. So
that first meal where they're eating steak, did you all find that a little sus?
Yeah, and it's bad, right? She's a bad cook. They talk about that. Maybe I think that might have something to do with a feminist statement, or almost, actually, I take it back, like an anti-feminist statement, because the woman who's a Satanist and who is a committed feminist older woman has no idea how to cook.
Well, there's a patriarchal theme, like poor Rosemary. I mean, like she's gaslit, by everyone. Mm-hmm. She has no control over anything. She's kept from all of her friends. This one time she does meet up with her friends, it turns into like this huge fight with her and her husband afterwards. Mm-hmm. And it just throws her into deeper isolation from the world. And then when she finally gets away, she goes to the doctor, who actually, I don't think he started to believe her story, but he could tell that something clearly was up. But instead of helping her, he reaches out to her husband, brings her back into the fold.
How did you guys perceive that conversation with the doctor? Did you perceive that he was listening to her and believing her, or did you know he was going to turn on her?
I knew he was going to turn on her.
I didn't necessarily think that she was going to turn on her. I didn't think that he was like part of the machinations. He was clearly
he wasn't.
Yeah, no, he was clearly separate from the whole cult thing. But
he's just part of this society that basically views a woman's health as the purview of her husband, essentially,
which might have been part of the codified
that was
law.
The time.
No, it absolutely was the law. I don't know.
I mean, guys, it wasn't until the 80s where women could get a credit card without permission.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I'm not 100% sure that law about a woman's doctor visits was true yet, especially in a place like New York in the late 60s. But yeah, it definitely was the law in a lot of places. Boy, I don't really want to get into this too much, but it's why the abortion debate is such a trigger for a lot of people. To me, I never really understood it. I'm like, who's trying to control your body? What are you talking about? But it's like literally this was the situation when like Betty Friedan was a young woman, so there's a reason why she thinks in this way. Maybe I guess it's a little bit of perspective for people.
I guess too. I remember my mom talking about this film and The Exorcist, and just how she was terrified of both, but in some ways how this scared her more because it tapped into that fear of your baby, fear of your husband, fear of your, just, and you have no control over this whole circumstance that is just, it's like, it should be this wonderful moment, and it's just totally turned on itself.
I didn't even think about, I was thinking of the feminist aspect of it, like with men trying to control your life, right? But there's also the aspect of, obviously none of us understands this because we're not women, but getting pregnant and then having a baby, I could see as feeling like a situation where you're like on a roller coaster ride and you can't get off. And it's like in some ways, kind of a terrifying thing that's coming and happening to you. And you have no control over the situation, essentially. It's like this magic thing happening inside your body that, and then all of a sudden there's a baby and you have all these responsibilities. And that's just biological reality, if you see what I mean. That's just what it's like. And not to mention, it used to be something that had a good chance of killing you, which we don't deal with in today's world as much. But
there is a concerted effort by everyone in this woman's life to lie to her and take away her ability to choose, which is pretty terrifying. And the fact that they have the ability to commit her to an insane asylum if they had wanted to, or various other power over her, to drug her, to send her to doctors she didn't want to go to, not send her to doctors she wanted to go to because they would withhold payment.
That's an interesting question. So I've been through some of the process with involuntary commitments, right? Like I've defended people in those processes before, and I'm trying to think whether someone who came in saying the things Rosemary is saying, I think you'd have like a 50-50 chance of getting committed even today involuntarily. If you were talking about my husband's a Satanist, my neighbors are Satanists, my baby might be the Antichrist, I think somebody might be able to say, well, she might hurt her baby, or
that's
hurt her
who I
husband.
thought the doctor was going to call was a psychiatric ward or something and have her to a psychiatric hospital. So
they basically didn't do that, and they probably still don't today do that very often to wealthy white women. Basically, that would be something. If you were in the lower classes, you probably would end up in a ward somewhere.
Yes, if you're rich, you're eccentric. If
you're rich, you're eccentric. Well, and also you have lots of what's the word I'm looking for? Lots of resources.
Money. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but not just money, resources in general, people that would look out for you, places you could stay, things like that.
Yeah.
That's one thing you notice when you see people who are mentally ill and on the street, is that it's that safety net, the personal family safety net that most people have, right? Most people have that. You end up on the street if you don't have that. There's no mom's house to go sleep on.
This is before Geraldo Rivera, had that whole expose on.
He wasn't the first to do that. There were people.
But that's where they put a lot of people then, and then
they totally did
that. That did
somebody Bly. Her name is Bly. Last name is Bly. She went undercover and basically went to the mental hospital here on Theodore Roosevelt Island and did a big expose about what they were doing to people there. And I think that was sort of going on over the course of the 20th century. People were like, whoa, they're just dumping these people into snake pits, essentially. And
probably put her in something like that if she wasn't a, rich white woman.
But if she didn't have means. Now, that's another question, though. Are they rich? I don't know how rich they are.
Well, I guess they're not. No, I mean,
right? Like,
an apartment in New York today would cost,
Oh, forget about it.
Right.
Well, first of all, you'd have to buy it. You couldn't rent a place like that.
Right.
So, I mean, to live at the Dakota, Yoko Ono just sold her place there 3 weeks ago or a month ago or whatever. Right. So, I mean, I would think each unit's got to cost $20 million or something
today.
$20 million
sure,
today. And they're renting the place, although it's a fictional building. And I guess it was sort of meant to look kind of old. And I guess they were kind of getting a deal on a place because it looked old and sort of antique. Today, it would be worth more.
They did mention rent control. And of course, the Council of Unit owners that are trying to rent it out are looking for very specific applicants, I would imagine.
Oh, okay. So you think they're sort of handing down the rent control to them?
They're being shown around by the real estate agent. He mentions that, they would charge more if they were allowed to.
You probably wouldn't believe it, but there are people today. I have a friend who lives right down the road, has a place right on the park, 3rd floor, right on the park, looking out onto the park. And I don't think they pay more than $2,000 a month for it because it's locked in. He's been living there since the mid 90s and the rent hasn't changed. So, I mean, that does still exist to some extent. Maybe to people who live in Virginia, $2,000 a month doesn't sound like a deal, but it's a deal. It's ridiculous.
I mean, from where that is, yeah. So back to the first question, the most important betrayal is the husband. When do you think he
definitely
makes that choice?
I think it's when he goes and he's having a good time talking to the old guy. I think the old guy kind of charms him on the first visit, and then he goes back and has another conversation with them without her.
Yes.
And the next night or a couple nights later or something like that. It was kind of unclear to me. I actually had to talk to my wife. I was like, did I miss that scene? Did that happen off camera? Did I walk out and go to the bathroom or what?
Well, no, I think you're exactly right. I think that's it. And there's a lot of supporting evidence for it.
Well, nothing happens outside of her perspective, right? You don't see anything but Rosemary.
That is a really good question. Is that true?
There
The
is
entire
nothing
film is
that
from her
happens
perspective.
without her there.
Basically,
entire
just the
film
opening and closing shots where you get the overhead of the building itself.
Right,
I think that's
right.
it.
But she's and it's they're really, that was one thing that struck me, is they don't ever take it off of her. They always have some cut where she's always in the picture, almost like there isn't like one scene where she's not some part of the setup for for the shot.
I think it's almost like, well, I mean, it's based on a novel, right? A novel has a modified form of third person perspective where, if you know what I mean, it's like it's technically sort of sounds like a third person omniscient, but it's just that character's perspective from the third person omniscient. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? It's like
I think
it
so.
sounds like things are being described that aren't real. It's kind of like seeing the apartment building from up high. It's
Mhm.
like that perspective. She technically can't see what the building looks like from on top, but it's literally just following her. It's not, you don't know what anybody else is thinking.
Right.
You're privy to what she's thinking constantly. So I think that kind of makes sense that the film was sort of done that way because it was done quick too. I mean, I think the movie was optioned before the book was even published.
Oh,
And I think Polanski was
wow.
working on, but the book was published in 67. Polanski was working on the script like right away. As soon as he read the book, he was like, I'm doing this, put it together. And I think they started filming it like immediately. There's a very fast turnaround. So it's not a big departure from the book.
I mean, there are not a lot of complicated sets or much of anything
No.
to worry about. It's a very claustrophobic movie, especially for the first three-quarters of it. It all
Right.
takes place on interior shots until she goes outside, I think, twice in the movie.
Yeah,
Right.
she goes around the city a little bit. It would be very hard to film a movie like this today, like maybe impossible. I don't think you could get.
So
Although
that
they did Only Murders in the Building, which is at another fancy apartment building not too far from the Dakota, and they managed to film that recently. They got the exteriors and things like that. So I don't know, maybe it's possible. If you can do it for a TV show, you could certainly do it for a movie.
a fair amount of that was done during the pandemic. She walks across the street and all the cars are stopping in front of her.
Right.
Uh-huh.
That was not planned. That is her and Roman Polanski walking across the street after him telling her nobody would hit a pregnant woman.
Right. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. That was pretty funny. What do you guys know about Roman Polanski's? We talked a little bit about it, but is there anything other than it's pretty much Chinatown and
Yeah.
Rosemary's Baby?
Macbeth,
Obviously,
the
then
version of Macbeth was done right after his wife was killed, and it's intense. It's very bloody.
okay.
It's very, I mean, it's a dark, it's a dark play, but I mean,
Yeah.
It's brutalist, really, in a lot of ways.
it's the brutality of it. It's very brutal. And if you get a chance to check it
God,
out,
speaking of things that are cursed, right? Speaking of productions that are cursed, the guy's doing Macbeth also. Maybe he was like, you know what? Nothing worse could possibly happen to me.
you're
Let's
right.
go for it. Let's do the Scottish play next.
Right. Well, he must have felt cursed at some point. And I don't know if you know the details of, Sharon Tate's death, but
I read Helter Skelter, so yeah,
Okay,
to
man.
some extent,
right.
And I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I
I
guess
mean,
has a different ending, obviously.
they were
But
told to be brutal, by
It
man.
was.
Yeah.
yeah, and I guess that sort of segues into not really a curse for him; it's his own doing, but the accusations that led to him basically having to escape the country because apparently people in Europe look more favorably upon drugging children and essentially, raping them, I guess, for lack of a better word. So,
Yes, giving
Well,
Quayle to a 13-year-old girl. And yeah.
yeah, I sort of had heard about that story when I was a kid, and I don't know who told me the story. They may have couched it this way, but I thought that there was some aspect of it that was like Americans are really puritanical, and what happened wasn't a big deal. And I read the story. I was like, what do you? That's not okay in any country. That's not Americans being puritanical. There's
Well,
I mean,
Bill Cosby got away with it for a long time.
Bill Cosby got away with it, but no, that's because nobody knew about it. Nobody was like,
I'm not
okay.
by any means defending it, but apparently the victim did come out and speak and say that it was consensual to a degree, but she was so young. That's not an excuse by any means. He's a horrible, terrible man, but I think that what it is it was viewed as an older man being with an extremely younger.
Which probably would be
I
okay.
feel
In some
dirty
European
saying all of this,
countries.
by the way. I think that because I remember what you're saying too. I do remember when I was younger hearing that Yeah, he went to, I think he went to France, and France has, it was just this other way to kind of dog on France and say that France, has these open ideas about whatever. And yeah, there's just a lot of weird, shady stuff that did happen there, and he clearly raped her, but it's not as cut and dry as pedophilia and rape and all that. I mean,
Pretty close to cutting.
yeah, I mean, it is.
He was 42 at the time, and she was 13.
I'm not doing a good
So
job.
What's his filmography? Asking this question by way of coming to a conclusion on, is his body of work good enough to continue to interact with it despite, what we know about this person? Because I know people love Chinatown. I've seen it several times. Jack Nicholson's great in it. Like, he's a force of nature in it, I think. But I don't love that movie.
It's good.
I don't know.
I absolutely do. I think Chinatown's a nearly perfect movie.
Okay. It's one of those ones I want to keep coming back to every once in a while. It's kind of like eating olives. Like, I know everybody else likes them, so I try them every once in a while, and then I'm like, oh no, I still don't like olives. So I'll watch Chinatown again at some point, and maybe.
I mean, there's The Pianist, there's The Ninth Gate.
Ninth Gate, which, by the way, we keep bringing up the Frank Langella connection to my apartment. Speaking of Satanists living in your New York apartment, Frank Langella used to sleep in this room, so that's kind of weird.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is actually the connection that we had talked about previously off the podcast.
Okay.
Frank Langella was going to be the original star of The Fall of the House of Usher, but he was fired for being a sex pest. And
what distinguishes a sex pest from?
Mostly grabbing people on set, telling color jokes, making people generally uncomfortable, regaling them with stories of his own experiences.
Yeah, probably some of which happened right here in this room. That's great, lovely. That's something.
Yeah. So that's what made me kind of laugh when you picked this movie. I know it's your wife's favorite movie, and you're living in there. You're in a kind of way like an out of state couple moving to New York into an apartment with a checkered past.
I know. Kevin, you mentioned that your mom was, I would say, a big fan of this movie and The Exorcist. I mean, if you're scared of a horror movie,
she wasn't a fan. It was the opposite. It was like one of those things where, why did I see it? That terrified me for.
Okay.
Like, it had a deep impact. But it was a big hit at the time. I mean, it grossed. It was like
it was huge. It's huge.
It was like the fourth highest grossing film that year.
And clearly,
was this movie why your mom wouldn't let you become a Satanist?
What percentage of moms would be okay with their kid being a Satanist? Let's be honest. I mean, even our moms
don't actually worship Satan. It's.
No, I think, and this movie
wouldn't even let you listen to Kiss, right?
That's what
they are knights. They are knights in Satan's
no
service.
Kiss, no Slayer.
I think this movie was a big hit, but it led to the really monster runaway success of The Exorcist a couple years later. I mean, I think that was like a cultural phenomenon. My mom said
this made it possible in a lot of ways because its popularity was so great. It was
that movie always felt flat with me. I watched that and I was like, whatever. Like, I think if you're not religious, it lacks some of the horror.
The Exorcist?
The Exorcist is just like, that's not real. That doesn't scare me.
Right. At the time, most everybody was pretty religious. I mean, it was a more religious time than it is now.
Sometimes I think it's a less religious time now, and sometimes I don't. I don't know.
When I was young, when I saw it, it scared the crap out of me. And that was terrifying. And I mean, it's got some scenes, with that are pretty over the top. I mean, the scene with the crucifix.
Well, there's some gory, graphic, gross outs.
It's pretty extreme. You
know what movie on the same, actually similar to The Exorcist, and I think along with those movies influenced Ghostbusters, which is one of my favorite movies ever, is this movie, Poltergeist, sucks. We went back and watched that. I was like, this movie sucks.
It has a few really good scenes, but
it has a couple of memorable scenes. But it's like,
but
it scared the crap out of me when I was a little kid. My kids wanted to watch it, and obviously the baby was hiding under blankets while it was going on. But they liked it. But I was watching. I was like, man, this movie's hard to watch. This is just not a good movie. It's talking about those couple of different horror movies has reminded me, and this came up in my mind last night. I watched The Cabin in the Woods. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that.
Yeah, I really like Cabin in the Woods.
It's really, really good. I gave it like a 9 because a couple of the elements of the movie made me dock it a little bit in terms of how good I thought it was. But I was thinking about the whole movie is a play on the intellectualization of horror movies. Which is,
well, it's also only funny if you've seen a lot of horror movies.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I'm not a big horror movie guy, but I totally got it. I got what they were riffing on. I understood what was happening. But it's not just it's not just parodying them. It actually uses elements of the things people talk about in academic discourse when discussing horror films.
And like literally Scream try to do that too.
Scream does that, but Scream does that from like the audience's perspective, like the audience commenting on horror films. And it's meta, totally meta. But this is meta to the level of, there are people that write books about how horror movies are a cathartic sacrifice of the young, that we like to watch to sort of reveal our own to expurge like our own sins and things like that. And I'm like, basically, what I'm talking about here is why do horror movies get so much intellectual discourse about them? Like, why are people so comfortable, and why is there so much literature of people talking in smart ways about horror movies? You don't do that about romance movies, right? Mm-hmm. Like romance movies kind of scratch a similar basic urge of people, right? Which is like, eroticism or romance or whatever. This kind of scratches the urge of like the fear of fears. Mm-hmm. Why does that get intellectualized so much when other genres of film don't? I think science fiction does. I think science fiction, you get a lot of people talking very intelligently about it, but that kind of makes sense to me. Why horror? Why is it singled out? Like Get Out is a very smart film that's saying all kinds of really smart stuff about society and about filmmaking. And why is that so common in horror? Why is it so meta? It's almost like maybe because it is so shocking.
Something to hold together a horror movie, whereas you like with a romance, you don't. You just have them happy at the end and everyone walks away okay with it.
There's nothing. Couldn't you have a lot of fun analyzing the psychology of like why people need what they need in a romance film, the same as you could as why do they need what they need in a horror movie? I mean, it seems like you could.
I don't know. I think the reason people need things in a romance film is pretty straightforward.
Right.
But I think that's what I was saying. You would think that the same sort of base urges would lie at the root of horror, but horror.
Well, no. A romance film is about safety and comfort for a lot of people.
Right.
And that's a polar.
No one has to explain why you like a romance film, but you have to explain why you like something that scares you and could lead some sort of harm.
Couldn't you intellectualize the things that you need for comfort the same way that you intellectualize the thing? I mean, that says a ton about you and about society in the same sort of way, right?
Sure. You get that in certain romance films.
When Harry Met Sally.
And yeah.
When Harry Met Sally is a very funny, very smart romance film, but I've never heard anybody intellectualize the film in any way.
What's that Christmas movie?
Love Actually?
Yes. People rhapsodize about that movie.
How much they like it, but they don't tell you what it says about current society, right? I mean, it's weird.
Because it doesn't. I think horror, even like B horror is still like kind of hitting a.
We did Godzilla, right? We did a podcast about Godzilla, and you get into like fear of nuclear Armageddon and technology out of control and stuff like that. And you right away getting into these interesting conversations about what people fear.
Right, and I think that's what a horror film, if it's good, it's tapping it. Like Rosemary's Baby is definitely tapping into feminism and the patriarchy, and there are some political elements to this. And that
who is the first final girl in horror? The trope of the
generally accepted as Jamie Lee Curtis.
Jamie Lee Curtis, right? But that's 10 years after this. Isn't Rosemary kind of the final girl in this in a sort of way, and sort of centering the female character?
Rosemary does not walk away. She walks away broken, like transformed in a negative way.
Is it though, or does she achieve agency at the end?
She loses everything. Her independence. She loses. She could have gotten away. She gave all that up. She was so broken that she gave up.
You know what she does at the end, and like I said, this is more manifest in the book, but she accepts the role as the mother of this Antichrist so that she can influence the Antichrist and influence the future. And if you think about it, that's her accepting a woman's traditional role in history, which is to be behind the throne influencing people, not trying to be the face of things. So that would be a definite loss. But then I don't know, maybe it's an argument that that's a power for women. I could see it either way.
Right.
Don't you also have to be kind of in a slasher film to be a final girl? And like only
I agree.
dies.
Yeah. I agree. But I guess what I'm saying is maybe centering a woman, although it would be Night of Living Dead is the first final girl, right? Isn't George Romero? That's about this time. That's in the late 60s.
That's this year. That's 68. That was.
Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. I take it back. Spoiler alert for Night of the Living Dead, but it's not a woman who's the last person alive.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So that's not true. I think there is a woman who's left at the end of the movie, but it's actually a black guy, and that's part of what they're talking about there. But again, you could sit there and intellectualize Night of the Living Dead in a way that you can't do with Love Actually. Why? I'm fascinated by why that is. But anyway,
I wanted to talk about how impressive this movie is from a filmmaking standpoint. There are so many callbacks and pieces of foreshadowing in the movie that are really impressive from a technical viewpoint, and even things they don't explain, like why is the closet important? Because there's a secret. Well, they do kind of get into that at the end.
They get into it eventually.
There's a secret door, and that's.
By the way, one of my favorite tropes in movies and Scooby-Doo is secret passages. I just anything with the secret passage, you've got me. Like when I was a little kid, I think I was about 7. We went on this trip up to New England, and my parents took me to the House of the Seven Gables from Nathaniel Hawthorne, and we did a tour where they showed us like the secret passages to go through the building and stuff. And I think I've been fascinated with secret passage. I probably was into the secret passages. I think there was a trapdoor in Castle Grayskull that might have been my first secret passage.
One other random question to throw out here to you guys. The way the movie resolved at the end, they don't show the baby.
Right.
Do you think it's better to not show that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think you're missing a trick. It could be really cool to see like a demon baby. I'm very curious what the demon baby looks like. But much in the way that I preferred the Empire Strikes Back version of Boba Fett, you can show too much. You can leave people wanting more in a movie. And I think that's the way to go. They would never do that today.
There are no supernatural things that happen in this movie, right? It's all kind of implied. There's no.
Well, they hex people, right? I mean, they put a hex. I wanted to mention the guy Donald Baumgartner, the guy that has the part in the play that he steals the play from.
Blindness.
And then she calls him on the phone. Did you guys catch who's on the phone when she calls? It's Tony Curtis from Spartacus.
Yep, it is. And they didn't tell her in advance.
And they didn't tell Mia Farrow. Oh, by the way, there's more to say about Mia Farrow, for goodness sake. But anyway, they didn't tell Mia Farrow who she was talking to on the phone. So the confused look on her face is her going, I know this voice. Who is this guy? Is that Tony Curtis? Like, it's just like,
is that who that was? I didn't catch that.
Yeah. That was pretty funny. Yeah, we mentioned that Sharon Tate is in the film, although I didn't catch her. I looked afterwards. This movie is Charles Grodin's first appearance. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
It's his first big movie, and it's his first movie with a speaking part. I think
it's his first film. He's in a bunch of TV stuff before this. Okay. When I looked at the filmography, but
it is so hard to take Charles Grodin seriously.
It really is. He shows up early, and you could just kind of see him in profile for a second. And I said to my wife, I was like, "Is that Charles Grodin?" And she was like, "Who's Charles Grodin?" I'm like, "Okay, never mind." But from The Great Muppet Caper and Beethoven and Midnight Run.
I think he's been retired for over 20 years. So yes,
Charles Grodin. He passed away pretty young, actually.
But he retired 20 years ago. And I know he's passed since then.
Could be.
He definitely stepped away from movies. And
what did you all think of the necrophilia comment? Like, we're trying to
we try to keep this kind of general audiences because we didn't talk about the rapes. No, it's fine. We didn't talk
actually I meant to ask if we could even say the word rape.
No, we can. We can. We're assuming grown-ups. We try not to be. We're assuming everybody's a grown-up. We try not to be explicit, and there's no reason that we can't talk about something like that. But I'd like to run it through the lens of what was it like for people watching in 1968. To me, in 2023, I'm like, that husband raped his wife.
Right. And it was just so casually, dismissed.
And she's just like, oh, that's a bummer.
Oh, and he was just I guess now I know what it's like to be a necrophiliac. It's like he's kind of turned on.
What's that like? That's
honestly knowing what you know about Roman Polanski as well.
Oh my God.
Right.
It's like it's that creepy feeling you get watching a Tarantino.
The book touches
Is life? Do you think life is imitating? Do you think? I mean, obviously, I think the Manson thing, unless Manson was thinking about Rosemary's Baby, is just a coincidence, right? But is life kind of imitating art when Polanski? Because that happens in the book, by the way. Ira Levin wrote the marital rape scene with the drugs. That happens in the book, 100%. Is that somehow happening because of his experience with making this movie or something? I don't. What ended up happening to him later in life?
Well, I mean, Quaaludes were a really popular party drug in New York in the 70s and even into the 80s.
Maybe I'm very naive about drugs, but what is party about Quaaludes? Quaaludes seem like they would not be any fun at a party. That seems like that would kill the party, but I don't know.
Well, I kind of view the definition of party drugs as, it had the intended effect with Roman Polanski's wife.
I mean, was that Quaaludes though in the movie though? Is that?
No, I don't think it's meant to be Quaaludes. It's
no, but with Roman Polanski and the 13-year-old girl, it was explicitly Quaaludes.
Oh.
It was probably something that Abe Saperstein gave them because he's a real piece of work. The doctor that's involved in this, who by the way is the guy from Trading Places. Did you guys notice that?
No, I haven't seen Trading Places in a long time.
It's one of the two older men.
One of the two old guys. Yeah, because I was looking, I was like, oh, who is that actor? And then I had to look it up. So yes, we kind of talked about this before, but I had heard the story about how Woody Allen's son, he always believed, is actually Frank Sinatra's kid. I didn't realize Mia Farrow was married to Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
And that Frank Sinatra divorced her during the production of this. She was really upset about it. So,
well, yeah, he forbade her from making the movie, and she went ahead and made it, and they got divorced. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think she had some unresolved issues with Frank Sinatra, basically. So, I think it's even more likely that the kid is actually Frank Sinatra's kid. That seems entirely plausible, especially when you look at the kid.
Important stuff. What did you guys think about the pixie cut?
Not a fan.
It was interesting. It was definitely, there was a purpose to it. Women started cutting their hair like that after the movie.
Yep. It became a cultural phenomenon. Honestly, I think it looks great on her. I think she's also gorgeous, but
I think a woman who's really, really has a really, really beautiful face can carry a pixie cut. But I think not having a pixie cut is always an improvement on having a pixie cut, if you see what I mean. It's like,
what was the significance of the movie?
Usain Bolt can probably still outrun me while he's got like a chain tied around his leg or something, but that he's faster when he doesn't. Mia Farrow is a beautiful woman. She still looks pretty with that cut, but it's better when she doesn't.
I don't mind a pixie cut. I think it look quite attractive.
Well, that's fine. That's to each his own.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the movie, what do you think it signified with her cutting off her hair and
women's liberation? I think
there's a little bit of women's lib, but also story-wise, it was a warning sign to the cult because she had stopped taking her drugs and was starting to come out of
it actually
the fugue
story. Yeah, that's right. She could have just pretended to be continuing to take the drugs, right? If she'd been,
I gather in the book, she does a little bit more of that, where she, to get away, she hoards the pills that have been given to her and grinds.
She runs away. She runs away in the book. She goes and gets a cabin and stays in a cabin for a month by herself.
Yeah, but at the very end, where she's getting the pills, she hoards those pills, then grinds them up and gives them to the woman who's watching her, and then when she falls asleep, she escapes to find her baby.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, that does happen. That's right. Oh, we didn't talk about Ruth Gordon. Ruth Gordon won a Best Supporting Actress for this film.
Well deserved. She was really good.
She is good, but you know what I know her from? It was bugging me all through the movie.
Harold and Maude.
Harold and Maude. Yeah, as soon as I looked at the filmography,
that's my brain was spinning. I couldn't figure out why. Yes.
I had the same experience, which again is something you watch and you're just like, the 70s, like the late 60s and into the 70s was this renaissance in film. I mean, they really just did a bunch of really amazing, cutting edge, awesome stuff in American movies at that time. It was a bit like that at the end of the 90s. We got a nice pulse, but there hasn't been anything like that since, I don't think. Well,
this was solidly in the 60s. This came out in
68.
Well, I think the traditional year where American cinema really changed is 64. So I think it's from 64 to about 75. You've just got some amazing stuff. And then post Jaws, it's all people making money, but there's still some great movies, but
Spielberg ruined film forever. Everything now has to have this incredible polish. I'm not.
But the funny thing is some of Spielberg's movies are some of my favorite movies, right?
Oh, he's excellent. He's excellent.
Kind of like I 100% agree with Martin Scorsese when he says that Marvel movies have absolutely obliterated what's left of movies.
I'm done with
but
it.
I love the Avengers. I really like the Avengers. That was a great movie. And I really liked a couple. I like a couple of the Marvel movies, but in general, like Ant-Man, whatever the heck the last one was, I was just like, what am I doing with my life?
Just crap.
Why am I
I feel like commercialization of movies has ruined them more than any individual director or franchise itself. I mean, the second that you decide we're going to make 50 movies revolving around this, there's no way you can keep the quality up for all of them. You're just turning it into a movie mill.
Right.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
At a certain point, your great idea starts working against itself. As a kid, when I'd read comic books, I'd be like, how could they make a movie out of this? There's no way this could be cool on the screen and also have the comic book feel. But, they managed to.
But you were correct because you were reading X-Men books, right?
And, well.
Oh, wait, we never commented on the vodka blush. What did you guys think? I'm actually turning pink. I'm actually blushing. See that?
You are. That's interesting.
Maybe I have too much grenadine in it or something, but it's got a nice smell. It's got a nice initial taste, but the aftertaste is not working for me.
I got a lot of lime juice in mine. It's very lime juice forward for me. I did just enough grenadine to color it, to get that shade that you saw in the film. If you see that, like I wanted that color, but that was all the grenadine I did. I can't taste the grenadine at all. Yeah, yours is grenadine. That looks like a glass of grenadine.
There's very little grenadine in there, but okay.
But yours looks very red.
Yeah, I can't comment at all.
And then I had a lot of rosemary in the shaker, and I honestly, in hindsight, I think they just said in the ingredients to put in rosemary because of the film. I don't think the people in the film have any rosemary.
They don't. It's probably an affectation, but
I think honestly, can you taste something like that in a cocktail? I don't really. You actually have a sprig of rosemary that you're drinking. So you can smell it, but mine is just mixed in. So I don't actually think it had much effect.
That may be making it a little bit more bitter for me too.
I wanted to talk about what an influence that this book and a couple of other things around the same time, this book especially, is a huge influence, I think, on Stephen King. This is coming out about 4 years before, 3 or 4 years before he wrote Carrie. And I think this tremendous amount of sense. I think this book and film and like how smart it is, but it's also a horror movie. I think that's what Stephen King is trying to do. He's trying to write Ira Levin. Ira Levin doesn't write horror otherwise, for the most part. I don't think any of his other books are horror. But Stephen King is trying to write an Ira Levin novel every time he writes his books, some of which are closer than others to being good. And that's why he deals, I think that's probably what inspired him to deal with feminism in so many of his like better books. I think actually most of Stephen King's good books have that as a theme, like Dolores Claiborne, Carrie.
Right? Yeah,
I think those are two of his best, and I think that's a really those have that theme forward.
What's funny is Levin doesn't write about horror, but every one of his books involves a conspiracy.
I know there's other books of his that I'm familiar with, but I can't think of what they are off the top of my head. But what I was talking about with the Stephen King thing is that Hutch is a character trope that Stephen King uses in about 75% of his books, where there's a totally good professor figure that knows everything and can help everybody, and there's like Glenn Bateman in The Stand. There's a character like that in a whole bunch of his stuff. I really think this was like a big influence on his work.
They get killed about halfway through.
That is a horror trope. That may have started with Rosemary's Baby. Is that?
Ooh, that's a good question. You mean like the professor that? No, that's a science fiction trope. The professor that knows everything. But the professor that knows everything in the science fiction movies, in the Stephen King books and in this one, he's a force for good. Well, my biggest surprise, and one of the only things that surprised me in watching the film, having read the book, and really, like I said, very faithful adaptation. I think it's like point for point, almost the same length. You almost spend the same amount of time reading the book as you do watching the film, because it's a 2.5-hour movie. It's not short. My biggest surprise is that Sharon Tate is in this movie. We talked about this already, but Sharon Tate being in this movie and then being murdered by Satanists about a year later, that's mind-blowing to me. That is creepy and like rhymes in a way that real life doesn't usually rhyme. I didn't even really think about it until just now while we were sitting here doing the podcast, how weird that is. That's my biggest surprise. I think it's a doozy, but it's kind of a waste because we already talked about it.
For me, it was just how political it was. I remember I came in thinking it was going to be a campy horror that was, kind of Vincent Price-esque. Yeah, it was definitely making a statement. I don't know if it was a positive statement about women in general, and but it was, there was a lot going on there in terms of clearly the gaslighting. There's a patriarchy kind of keeping her down. She tries to break free, and the patriarchy brings her back in. I didn't realize just how political.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I know what you're saying. I don't know if political is
Maybe
quite.
political is not the right word.
It's commentary. Like to what extent it's like
social commentary, right?
Social commentary,
yes,
right? Like it's not really it. I think the interesting thing about horror is that it usually doesn't come to any political conclusions. It's just these are the issues. Here, deal with it. This is what's happening in society. Well, I don't know. I don't know what you want to say about it, but here we go. It's like when I was talking about how she ends up accepting the woman's role as the power behind the throne. Well, I think the movie does that, but I don't know what it advocates in terms of that. I don't know what it's saying.
That doesn't come through in the movie, though, right? I mean, I think
it does. I mean, I don't know. Well, different people have different takes. I think it's in there. I think the text has that, but maybe I don't know. Yeah, it seemed to me like that was in the text of the film as well. But then again, the texts are inextricable if you've read the book. Anything surprise you, Chris?
Oh, the false advertising for sure. I mean, it says it's Rosemary's Baby, but it's hardly in the movie. No, my biggest surprise by far kind of is into Kevin.
I got to interrupt you with an anecdote that I'll lose if I don't think of it. Sorry. So when I was a kid, did you guys ever watch Family Feud?
Yeah, sometimes.
So they used to do this thing at the end of the movie where you got two chances to get all the points. You selected two members from your family to go up and answer questions by themselves to get enough points to win the game. You needed like 100 points. And this one time, the first person came up and got all the questions right, and they were done. But they didn't tell the second family member. So the second family member came up, and the guy and Ray Cohn just made up questions to ask the second family member. And one of them was like, "What is the ugliest child you've ever seen?" And the guy was like, "Rosemary's Baby."
That's a really good answer, actually.
It was a terrific answer. Yeah, I was like.
My answer kind of rhymes with Kevin's, actually. I have always thought of this as a bit of a horror movie, which are not known for being particularly well made. So my biggest surprise by far was just how well made this movie was. I mean, Roman Polanski put a lot of thought into every shot. I think we mentioned a little bit about the callbacks, how every scene sets up another scene.
It's very avant-garde too, right? Like the camera work is avant-garde. The music, we didn't mention the music except to say the guy died.
Extremely
crazy atonal jazz that's going on. Like
it feels like a modern movie in a lot of ways.
Yes, it does. Or like something from French or Italian cinema from the 60s.
I don't know, for a movie made in 1968 to feel this modern, like you could release it in a theater today and maybe cut a little bit out to try and get it under 2 hours.
I think you'd have to. I don't think you should, but I think you would have to.
But looking at other movies made in the same era, it doesn't feel anything like those. It drags a little bit in some places, I think, to the modern eye. This movie didn't have to be this good, and it was, and it really makes it
very watchable, very palatable. I'm with you. I found myself completely engrossed. It was.
Did you know where the movie was going? You said that. I mean, did you know where the film was going as you watched?
I thought she might kill the child at the end, so I wasn't sure where it was going to end, but I knew.
I thought the baby was sacrificed. I thought that at the beginning I was like, oh, it's going to be, the Antichrist, and then I fell into her thinking that it was going to be sacrificed, and I think they kind of do that by forcing the perspective through her. You don't think outside of that, and so I went back on my thinking, and but then when I realized what was going on, I was like, oh yeah, of course, that's what I thought initially, but. Yeah, I guess that was not really a twist for me, but it was.
No, so this is something that surprised me actually when I first read the novel, and I didn't mention it because I read the novel, like I said, a couple of months ago. But I thought the ambiguity. I thought it would be like Total Recall. I thought the movie would end with the ambiguity of was she crazy or not, right? Because all through the movie, you could read the movie as being like she's paranoid. She made up all this stuff. But the end of the film and the end of the book are both very explicit. No, she's right. They're Satanists. Like they take off their hoods and tell her exactly what's going on at the end. Right. And I thought
would you going to be happier with one of the other endings? Would you be happier if it was more ambiguous?
Maybe, because I don't know. That's a really good question, because if you look at it, it's a little corny, that last scene where you can see everybody in the room, right? It's a corny scene. It's corny on purpose. It's what he's going for. Very much like I've always said about a Marvel movie is like, you better do this with a wink because this is stupid. This is a stupid concept.
Yeah.
Having a room full of elderly Satanists is a dumb thing to have in your movie. So
kind of funny though, honestly. You could.
It is kind of funny. It is kind of, but you better
and they
be
do
aware.
a little bit when the woman's rocking it too hard and she like leaves and sticks her tongue out.
It's funny,
That's
right?
a fun scene.
And she sticks her tongue out at her when she goes.
Yes,
like,
yes, he caught that.
They know what they're doing. They're winking at you. Thank God, because if they weren't, you'd be rolling on the floor laughing at them. You want to make sure everybody's laughing with you and not at you with that kind of a scene. So I think they did pretty well with that.
I'm kind of persuaded that it's better to let you know, because too much ambiguity in this movie where you're building up that kind of paranoia would be too much.
This may be colored by the fact that I watched The Cabin in the Woods, and I would have liked ambiguity about the ending of Cabin in the Woods. That would have been great if you didn't know what happened in the last 3 minutes. If it just ended, I would have been happier with that.
Much better movie, I think.
Yeah, I think that was the reason why I docked that movie from being a 10 to a 9, is that I thought that ending was, I didn't like the ending. So I think we all had pretty good surprises about this film. Nobody got exactly what they expected out of it, right? What are we going to do about voting for this? Apparently I'm ruled out because I'm the one that chose this, although I hadn't seen it. So I think wait, we have 3 people, so I think we just put it up to a vote.
Yeah,
like everybody's vote could just count, right?
Absolute classic. The Exorcist would not exist. That whole
The Omen
would not exist. You know, that whole genre would not exist, and those are some of my favorite.
All the sequels wouldn't exist.
Well, I guess there's that, but
nobody would have been afraid that Dungeons and Dragons players were actually summoning demons if they hadn't watched this. I think.
Ooh, that could have changed Kevin's life.
My life would have been so different if this movie didn't exist. This definitely left a mark on cinema, on the zeitgeist. It clearly is a classic, in my view.
Okay.
I didn't really like watching this movie, but I respect the hell out of it, and I think it's really well done. It changed cinema. So, yes, it's the classic.
So it gets your vote despite the lack of personal enjoyment in watching it.
Yeah, I can't say I really enjoyed watching this movie. In fact, I had to watch it in segments. I couldn't sit down and watch it wire to wire. I just couldn't.
Oh, interesting. I ended up watching it in segments because I did the first half hour on the elliptical and then watched the rest of the movie with my wife, but it wasn't because I was bored or anything. That's just the way it
I was fully engrossed, and that maybe that can add that as my addendum to the surprise. That surprised me how I was drawn into it.
So you have a love of horror that surpasses most people I know.
But what's your horror thing? Slashers or psychological horror, or what's your?
I just like well-crafted horror. It can be.
Well, then you're gonna like this. Yeah, I think you'd like this. Yeah,
there has to be a like the screenplay is amazing. The production, everything pulled off very well.
I mean, so for me, I kind of had a similar reaction to Chris. I wasn't gripped by the film. I appreciated the film all the way through. I was like, this is a good movie. I mentioned Night of the Living Dead earlier. When I watched that the first time, I saw it when I was a little kid, but I saw it again recently 4 or 5 years ago, and I was just gripped. I watched the whole movie from start to finish, and I was like, I don't want to stop watching this movie. I watched The Blob with my dad about 2 years ago and just watched it start to finish. I was like, this is a great gripping movie all the way through. This one did not do that for me. I could appreciate. So I'm saying old horror movies can get me, but this one didn't quite scratch that itch for me for some reason, but I still really liked it. I actually really enjoyed the book. I read the book in a very short sitting. I mean, I just kind of didn't want to put the book down. So
yeah, that surprised me. You said you finished that quickly. How long is the book?
It was a breezy read. I recommend it. I mean, it's like reading a Stephen King book, except I don't want to put down Stephen King, but a little bit smarter, a little more highbrow. Now, Stephen King is a very smart guy. I don't mean to put him down. He writes middlebrow because he's trying to grab people that aren't quite ready for
it's a pulpy element, yeah.
So like a less coked up Stephen King.
Well, I don't think he was all that coked up.
I'm talking about soft drinks, obviously.
I'm talking about Carrie. I'm talking about the Carrie era, and I don't think he was coked up at all when he was doing Carrie. So anyway, I would recommend the book very much. I found the book to be maybe the movie seemed kind of a little more humdrum to me because I'd already read the book.
It has to be an experience reading the book and watching the movie that close together.
It's pretty close. Yeah, it was pretty close together. And I've done that a few times with the podcast, actually, because we've had a couple of things that are books and movies. Like, well, we did 2 shows for Dr. No, for example. I think that's actually kind of a cool experience. Definitely always read the book first and then watch the movie, I would say. And I can't think of a counter example. There might be one, but we got 3 votes. Everybody voted in favor. Yeah. Some of us were a little more. So we basically got, I would say, 2 total votes, because Chris and I were some decimal of a vote, right? I think.
No, I think it counts as 3 full total votes. Check your spreadsheet, Dave. What's the last?
Yeah, I'd have to. I'm just. I don't know whether the equivocating that you and I were doing about our votes counts as a full vote. I think it's maybe like 1.7, like 0.75 for each of us and a full for Kevin. But
I think you can chalk it up to the 2 of us being total contrarians.
Devil's advocate, some might say.
Yeah.
I had a good time talking about this. I hope you guys did too. I hope the listeners enjoyed it. I want to give a shout out to my friends for coming in and doing this for me at last minute notice. Hey, there you go. For those of you who can't see, Kevin just did a surfing gesture, I think, right? Is that what that is? Is that the
Hail Satan, Hail Adrian.
That's the one thing where they give it away early in the film, right? He says year 1, like in the middle of the movie.
It's a little bit after the middle of the movie because it is the New Year's party.
Yeah, but it's before everything else has been revealed. And she has the baby in like June. So anyway, for Toasting the Classics, this is Dave McArthur.
I've been Chris Gragg.
Evan Doyle.
All right, so everybody, peace out.
Take care, guys.
That's it for episode 91 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, get some Hennessy for our discussion of Kanye West's album My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know if anyone is planning to steal your baby and sacrifice it to Satan. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.